Hello everybody, welcome to the Critical Issues Forum Online Teachers Workshop. Today, I would like to talk about recent international initiative in nuclear disarmament and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or TPNW, that was adopted on July 7, 2017. TPNW is also known as, more simply, the Ban Treaty, or Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty, but the official treaty name is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and its acronym is TPNW. TPNW adoption was the culmination of the work of a global network of like-minded countries and civil society groups that emphasized the devastating humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons use in order to delegitimize nuclear weapons comprehensively. This is outline of my lecture. So with a brief introduction, first I would like to start with a brief recap of a Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, NPT, just to highlight its discriminatory nature of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. When we talk about nuclear disarmament, it is also very important to understand what NPT stipulates. And the disarmament stalemate. The many non-nuclear weapon states believe that disarmament progress is not fast enough and the disarmament progress is too slow. So I would like to take a look at why the non-nuclear weapon states are thinking like that. And humanitarian initiative. This is the very important initiative in the history of nuclear disarmament movement. So I would like to discuss the details about humanitarian initiative. Then I'm going to talk about the overview of the Ban Treaty and some background and some process toward the treaty negotiation and some challenges in the Ban Treaty. Then the role of civil society and the role of education. This is one of my favorite topics, and I do believe that this is very important when we discuss nuclear disarmament. Then this divestment campaign is part of a civil society movement, and this is very unique and practical campaign to make progress nuclear disarmament. And this campaign is, in my view, is relatively unknown. So I thought it's important to introduce this to you. Then I would also like to touch upon some other countries' initiatives to make progress nuclear disarmament. And there are many different perspectives. So I'm going to introduce 3 countries' initiatives: Japan, the United States, and Sweden. Then I would like to conclude my lecture with some food for thought. So rather than giving some decisive policy recommendations for nuclear disarmament, I would like you to think about how we can make progress toward a world free of nuclear weapons. The nuclear disarmament is a very challenging task, and there is no short answer. So that's why it's so important to investigate many different approaches. First, let's quickly review the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, NPT. For more detailed information about the NPT, please review the lecture given by Mr. Jean Duprise. We often hear that NPT is a cornerstone of nuclear nonproliferation regime. If there was no NPT, it is likely that many other countries would have developed nuclear weapons after 1970, and that would have triggered regional and global arms race. President Kennedy in 1963 famously predicted, because personally I am haunted by the feeling that by 1970, unless we are successful, there may be 10 nuclear powers instead of 4, and by 1975, 15 or 20s. Currently, as we studied, there are 9 countries that possess nuclear weapons. Of these, 5 countries are NPT nuclear weapon states, and 4 countries are outside of NPT. So it is fair to say that NPT has been working to prevent further proliferation of nuclear weapons. But at the same time, NPT divided the world into 2 categories: nuclear weapons states and non-nuclear weapon states, so-called haves and have-nots. Under the treaty, nuclear weapon states are defined as the 5 states that exploded a nuclear device before January 1st, 1967. These countries are United States, Soviet Union, now Russian Federation, United Kingdom, France, and China. All other states would join as non-nuclear weapon states, agreeing not to acquire nuclear weapons in exchange for assistance in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Although there is consistent criticism against nuclear non-proliferation treaty due to its discriminatory nature, I would like to remind you of what the Article 6 of the NPT says. Article 6 commits state parties to pursue negotiations in good faith toward ending the nuclear arms race and achieving nuclear disarmament, promotes general and complete disarmament. However, there is no time frame of nuclear disarmament under the NPT. There is no deadline of the nuclear disarmament. Basically, NPT nuclear weapon states can continue to possess nuclear weapons for a very long time, for a foreseeable future. So, the NPT is often criticized because of its discriminatory nature. Many NPT states who do not have nuclear weapons are very frustrated by the lack of progress in nuclear disarmament. Division between countries with nuclear weapons and countries without nuclear weapons is getting deeper and deeper. Frustration among non-nuclear weapon states and civil society groups that are supporting nuclear disarmament, nuclear abolition, led to the start of a nuclear weapons ban treaty negotiation. All of nuclear weapon states were opposed to such a negotiation. Disarmament advocates believed that despite the NPT's good faith obligations, there was a legal gap that needed to be filled. Nuclear weapons, like chemical and biological weapons, needed to be prohibited. Both chemical weapons and biological weapons are already completely prohibited under international law. The lack of progress in nuclear disarmament can be seen in the deadlock at the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. For more information about the Conference on Disarmament, I would like to encourage you to review the lecture given by Mr. Jean Dupree. One of his lectures focused on the United Nations and disarmament machinery. But just briefly, the Conference on Disarmament is a single multilateral negotiating body on disarmament. In the past, they negotiated the Chemical Weapons Convention in 1993 and Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1996. However, since 1996, Conference on Disarmament has been in a deadlock. No negotiations have been conducted since 1996 because the member states have not been able to agree to what they should negotiate. Recent NPT review conferences highlighted large gaps over states' positions on nuclear disarmament. Such division has been seen not only between nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states, but also among non-nuclear weapon states. Nuclear weapon states, especially the United States and Russia, think they have made significant progress in nuclear disarmament. In fact, when we look at the number of nuclear weapons, it may be true. At the height of the Cold War, there were almost 70,000 nuclear weapons in the world. But currently, the number is approximately 14,000. The two countries possess more than 90% of world nuclear weapons. However, non-nuclear weapon states have been very unhappy about the slow progress in nuclear disarmament. But more importantly, non-nuclear weapon states, especially non-aligned movement countries, do not think nuclear weapon states have an intention to eliminate their nuclear weapons eventually. Most non-nuclear weapon states judge nuclear weapons modernization as evidence of a long-term commitment to retaining nuclear weapons rather than eliminating them. And this is contrary to the NPT Article 6. And because NPT Article 6 asks nuclear weapon states to work toward a world free of nuclear weapons. So let's take a look at these different views. Nuclear weapon states and its allies, such as NATO countries and Asian countries under the nuclear umbrella of the United States, they always insist step-by-step approach is the only way to make progress toward a world free of nuclear weapons. However, this step-by-step approach has been heavily criticized by many non-nuclear weapon states and civil society members who support nuclear abolition, because many non-nuclear weapon states do not think there is any significant progress. For many of them, step-by-step means lack of action. So non-nuclear weapon states, especially non-aligned movement countries, closely working with the civil society, tried to change disarmament discussions. They focused on the humanitarian impact of the use of nuclear weapons. They tried to focus on human aspects of nuclear weapons, not just national security or deterrence. So let's talk about humanitarian initiative, because this is a very important aspect of nuclear disarmament efforts. It was already obvious that nuclear weapons are inhumane. However, after the 2010 NPT Review Conference, this debate received more attention and gained momentum. At the NPT Review Conference in 2010, the final document for the first time included the humanitarian dimension initiative of nuclear disarmament. Since this is a very important document and this is a short paragraph, I would like to read this paragraph. The conference expresses its deep concern at the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons and reaffirms the need for all states at all times to comply with applicable international law, including international humanitarian law. It is very important to understand the actual impact of the use of nuclear weapons against humanity. You see the very painful pictures on this slide. In human history, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are the only two cities that have experienced wartime nuclear devastation. So it is important to imagine and try to understand what happened under the mushroom cloud, because that is where you can find the actual effects of the use of nuclear weapons. Not mushroom cloud, not shape of the mushroom cloud from the distance. It is crucial to listen to atomic bombing survivors' testimonials. Such direct, immediate first-person accounts fill the gap in historical facts of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and help to give a clear understanding of the actual effect of the use of nuclear weapons against human beings. The Hibakusha recollections help to demystify nuclear weapons and remove any justification or sanitization about the use of nuclear bombs. These are atomic bomb drawings by atomic bombing survivors, Hibakusha. These drawings describe the artist's own experience of the atomic bombing. Literally, this is a living hell. These drawings and paintings are records of the survivors. They are precious testimonies that illustrate the devastation of nuclear weapons. These are the actual impact of the use of nuclear weapons. These drawings accurately convey the inhumane nature of nuclear weapons. So I want to encourage you to take a moment to imagine how they felt while the atomic bombing survivors were drawing these paintings based on their painful memories. So now let me briefly talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing. These are a brief summary of atomic bombing of each city. And I included a list of useful resources that you can learn more about Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the impact of the actual use of nuclear weapons. So I want to encourage you to take a look at those resources. The atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima at 8:15 a.m. August 6, 1945. It detonated 580 meters in the air. Though we don't know exactly how many people were perished in the bombing, it is estimated that 140,000 and plus or minus 10,000 had died by the end of December 1945. And just 3 days later, on August 9th, the second atomic bomb was dropped in Nagasaki. The number of people who were killed is approximately 74,000. So just one single bomb killed so many people. And this statement by the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, Dr. Marcel Juno, eloquently expressed the unspeakable, horrible situation in Hiroshima after the bombing. After the Hiroshima bombing, ICRC Dr. Marcel Juno witnessed the devastation. He became the first foreign doctor to visit Hiroshima in September 1945. Since this is very important statement, let me read this paragraph. We witnessed a sight totally unlike anything we had ever seen before. The center of the city was sort of a white patch, flattened and smooth like the palm of a hand. Nothing remained. Every living thing was petrified in an attitude of acute pain. In addition to this paragraph, he also wrote a very accurate description of the result of the use of nuclear weapons. Conditions appalling. City wiped out. 80% of all hospitals destroyed or seriously damaged. Inspected 2 emergency hospitals. Conditions beyond description. Effect of a bomb mysteriously serious. Many victims, apparently recovering suddenly, suffer fatal relapse due to decomposition of white blood cells and other internal injuries, now dying in great numbers. Estimated still over 100,000 wounded in emergency hospitals located surroundings, sadly lacking bandaging materials, medicines. This statement clearly indicates the catastrophic consequences of the use of nuclear weapons, and it is impossible to treat victims adequately once nuclear weapons are used. More recently, in April 2010, ICRC made 4 important points regarding nuclear weapons. This statement made by ICRC then President Jacob Kellenberger in April 2010 is considered to be the basis of the recent humanitarian initiative. The position of the ICRC as a humanitarian organization goes and must go beyond a purely legal analysis. Nuclear weapons are unique in their destructive power, in the unspeakable human suffering they cause, in the impossibility of controlling their effects in space and time, in the risks of escalation they create, and in the threat they pose to the environment, to future generations, and indeed to the survival of humanity. The ICRC therefore appeals today to all states to ensure that such weapons are never used again, regardless of their views on the legality of such use. So I would like to suggest that you read the entire text. I put the link to this text. So I hope you read it. This statement eventually provided a powerful frame for the nuclear weapons ban movement. 4 key points made by this statement are: first, nuclear weapons are unique in their destructive power, in the unspeakable human suffering they cause, in the impossibility of controlling their effects in space and time, in the risks of escalation they create, and in the threat they pose to the environment, to future generations, and indeed to the survival of humanity. Second, it is difficult to envisage how any use of nuclear weapons could be compatible with the rules of international humanitarian law. Third, regardless of their views on the legality of nuclear weapons, states must ensure that they are never again used. Fourth, preventing the use of nuclear weapons requires fulfillment of existing obligations to pursue negotiations aimed at prohibiting and completely eliminating such weapons through a legally binding international treaty. Despite the inhumane nature of nuclear weapons and some efforts by the United Nations to address that aspect, the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons were not at the core of nuclear disarmament and nuclear nonproliferation discussion for many years. Of course, catastrophic consequences of the use of nuclear weapons has been obvious ever since nuclear weapons were used against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. However, nuclear disarmament issues have not been effectively discussed from the humanitarian perspective. Therefore, it is very important that the 2010 NPT Review Conference final document included text highlighting catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons. Why is it important to discuss nuclear weapons from humanitarian perspectives? There are several reasons. Nuclear weapons are a unique, existential threat to humanity. The effects of nuclear weapons cannot be controlled in space or time. Their existence anywhere is a threat to people everywhere. Humanitarian initiative debates highlighted human security, focusing on the people protecting human lives, not only security of states. This initiative also went beyond traditional security conversations. Another important point is the humanitarian initiative widened the circle of debates. It involves humanitarian organizations, such as ICRC, energizing the public civil society organizations, such as non-governmental organizations, educational institute, faith-based organizations. The humanitarian initiative led the 3 international conferences on humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. Through the conferences, this issue was discussed more comprehensively among countries and civil societies. The first conference held in Oslo in March 2013 focused on more scientific facts, avoiding political confrontations. There was not much debate on legally binding nuclear weapons ban treaty. The key findings of Oslo conference was that it is unlikely that any state or international body could address the immediate humanitarian emergency caused by a nuclear weapon detonation in an adequate manner and provide sufficient assistance to those affected. The second conference in Nayarit, Mexico in February 2014 was basically built upon the Oslo conference discussions. The chair's summary emphasized that the effects of a nuclear detonation would not be constrained by national borders and that it would lead to widespread suffering, lasting damage to civilian infrastructure, and intergenerational harm to human health. But the chair's summary also mentioned a legally binding nuclear weapons ban treaty. At the time, there were some states that thought it is a bit too early to discuss the nuclear weapons ban treaty. At the third humanitarian conference that was held in December 2014 in Vienna, Austria, as a host country and the chair of the conference, Austria issued the Austrian Pledge. This was initially a national pledge that highlighted a number of inescapable conclusions based on facts of the catastrophic consequences of the use of nuclear weapons. This Austrian pledge was supported by over 100 countries. And then this pledge became Humanitarian Pledge because it was no longer just Austrian Pledge. The Humanitarian Pledge reads, affirming that it is in the interest of the very survival of humanity that nuclear weapons are never used again under any circumstances. It also pledged to make efforts to stigmatize, prohibit, and eliminate nuclear weapons. The conference concluded with such a humanitarian pledge to identify and pursue effective measures to fill the legal gap for the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons. The United States and the United Kingdom attended the conference for the first time. China also attended as an observer. They basically repeated their ongoing position that is opposing legally binding nuclear ban treaty. And none of the nuclear weapon states and nuclear umbrella states supported this humanitarian pledge. After these three international humanitarian conferences, for about 2 years, the United Nations conducted the open-ended working group meetings to discuss nuclear disarmament, involving civil society members. Then, October 27, 2016, the United Nations General Assembly adopted an important resolution. This resolution, taking forward multilateral nuclear disarmament negotiations, mandated member states to negotiate legally binding nuclear weapons ban treaty. This UN General Assembly resolution is one of the highlights in the process of making the ban treaty. Since 2010, non-nuclear weapon states and civil society successfully pushed for the reframing of the debate on nuclear weapons and nuclear disarmament and focused on their humanitarian impact and the risk of use. Nuclear weapon states and their allies, nuclear umbrella states, opposed this movement. But this resolution was adopted because the majority of countries supported. You will see the voting result in this slide. Then the ban treaty negotiations started in March 2017. There were 2 sessions. The first session was held in March, and the second session was held in June to July of that year. The president of the conference was Ambassador Ellen White Gomez of Costa Rica. I would like to mention that Ambassador Ellen White Gomez is also Miss Alumna. So she graduated from then Montreal Institute. None of the nuclear weapon states participated. None of the US allies, with an exception of the Netherlands, participated. Some people say that this negotiation further deepened the division between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. During this conference, there were many setbacks in nuclear disarmament field. First, think about the timing. Early 2017. So this is right after the new US administration came to the office. The US administration, the Trump administration, decided to modernize nuclear weapons. Also around this time, North Korea was conducting nuclear weapons tests and missile tests very actively. This table is to give you an overview of who opposed and who supported the ban treaty. As you see, all the nuclear weapons possessing countries, both inside and outside of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, and the US allies, NATO countries, opposed the ban treaty. And the supporters are mainly non-aligned movement countries, such as South Africa, and Mexico, Ireland, and Austria, New Zealand. These countries are a core group of the supporters of the ban treaty. In March 2017, before the first session of the negotiation, Nikki Haley, then US ambassador to the United Nations, with the United Kingdom, France, and some other US allies, made a strong statement to express their opposition to the ban treaty at the United Nations, while other countries just started the negotiation of the ban treaty. Nikki Haley said, "There is nothing I want more for my family than a world with no nuclear weapons. But we have to be realistic. Is there anyone that believes that North Korea would agree to a ban on nuclear weapons?" So following this statement, those countries in opposition skipped the negotiations. Still, the ban treaty negotiations continued without nuclear weapons states. Without engaging any nuclear weapon states, the treaty was negotiated and adopted on July 7, 2017. Again, none of the nuclear weapon states participated in the negotiation, and none of US allies participated. The only exception was the Netherlands. The Netherlands was the only NATO country that participated in the negotiation. Of course, as a NATO country, the Netherlands opposed the ban treaty, so the Netherlands voted against. However, their participation contributed to non-proliferation discussions. In addition to that, I also would like to highlight Switzerland and Sweden, their roles during the negotiation. These countries voted yes, but they also highlighted the importance of non-proliferation and the IAEA safeguards issues. So this map shows the voting results. 122 countries voted yes on the treaty. And one country, the Netherlands, voted no, and this was of course expected. And one country abstained, that was Singapore. The treaty was opened for signature on September 20, 2017. In order for the treaty to enter into force, 50 countries need to ratify. And in 90 days after 50 countries have ratified the treaty, the ban treaty will enter into force. So this process may sound a bit complicated. And there might be some misunderstanding that the ban treaty is already in force or binding because it was adopted on July 7, 2017. But after the adoption, each country needs to take these steps, meaning countries need to sign the treaty and ratify it. This is the current status. The map is not up to date. I couldn't find the most up-to-date map, but the number is correct. As of today, 80 countries signed and 34 countries ratified. Therefore, 16 more countries to ratify to enter into force. So when will the treaty enter into force? Of course, I do not know. And some say within a year or two, but it's hard to predict. Now, let's take a look at what this treaty is saying. It is important to understand that this treaty itself will not eliminate or dismantle a single nuclear weapons. The treaty's main goal is to stimulate a societal and a political debate inside nuclear weapon states and their allies by strengthening the anti-nuclear norm and by stigmatizing nuclear weapons and their possessors. Once the treaty has entered into force, this treaty would prohibit states from developing, testing, producing, manufacturing, transferring, possessing, stockpiling, using, or threatening to use nuclear weapons. The treaty also includes victim assistance. The TPNW imposes obligation on state parties to provide assistance for nuclear weapons victims. This is known as a positive obligation.